Hello, everybody. As you probably heard, I'm Doug. I look after Amazon here in the UK. Anybody a customer? Thank you. Anybody had a problem recently? At the back, yeah? Do please feedback during the Q&A, and if we can't sort you out, very happy to come back later. And I'll come back to that point later on. So look, what I thought I'd do is I'll speak for a little while to just tell you a little bit about Amazon. Sorry to be, and for those of you who know us very well, my apologies. I hope it's not completely stuff you've heard before. But I'll talk a little bit about how we think about the business, some of our operating principles. I'll talk a little bit about what we actually do, because it is a question we get a fair bit. What do you actually do? And then I want to spend a bit of time talking about one other thing, but one very important thing, which is digital empowerment. And then we'll take questions. Sound okay? Great. So let me kick off with the operating principles. And we are very much a values and principles-led organization. And as we think about the business and we think about how we try and operate, we really have four fairly straightforward, but for us, very important operating principles. And they are in no particular order: customer obsession, a passion for invention, a commitment to operational excellence, and long-term thinking. And if you start with the first one, there are many, many different and good ways to organize a business. The way we express this is, of course, we pay attention to our competitors. Of course we do. And of course we take inspiration from great stuff we see that others are doing. But that isn't really what drives us. What drives us is there a customer pain point? Is there an unmet customer need? Possibly even a customer need that customers may not even have realized yet is a need. But is there something we can do that will actually create a better experience for a customer? And literally, every single thing we have ever done, every single product we've ever built, every single service we've ever launched has started with that. Is there an unmet customer need? Is there an opportunity for something we can do? And actually, we have a process to back this up. And the very first thing we do is we literally write the press release. What is that one, wow, compelling thing that in 3 years or 5 years' time, when we launch this into the world, is going to be that one amazing thing we did to improve the customer experience? And then from that, we then work backwards. And if we get excited about that, and we spend a long time iterating it, if we get excited about the opportunity to do something interesting and different, then we'll figure out how to go do it. And in some cases, this has meant having to figure out things that we've never done before. So if I give you a simple example, it's going back, goodness, nearly 10 years now. But in 2007, we launched the first Kindle e-reader. It was actually the first hardware device we'd ever built. We'd never done hardware before that. But when we looked for a few, and you can work backwards and figure out it was probably a couple of years before that, we had a pretty good business in physical books. We still have a great business in physical books, and we love books, and we love physical books. But we could also see that there was a customer demand for not just physical books, but couldn't I just read it on an electronic device? Now, e-readers weren't new. They'd have been around for years, many, many different attempts, and some of you will know that. Students of the history of technology will no doubt have some of these in the cupboard somewhere. Many, many attempts, but nothing had really taken off. And the question we asked ourselves was, what would it take to persuade Julian here, or Francois, or anybody else in the audience, or some of my friends? We've got some friends here, by the way, who'll be happy to take questions later if I can't answer them. What would it take to persuade a customer to actually say, you know what, I'm going to move from a paper book to reading on a screen? And we said, well, it's pretty clear. You'd have to have a device that, of course, weighed no more than a book. Of course, it would have to be readable in direct sunlight. Of course, it would have to have at least a month's battery life. Of course, you'd have to be able to hold at least 1,000 books. Of course, you'd have to be able to download a new book electronically for free anywhere in the world in less than 60 seconds. Sounds good? Great. We think if we had that, we think customers might get excited enough to make the shift. And then we said, fine, does it exist? Can we go find somebody to build that for us? And the answer was no. Now, we could have stopped. We could have said, well, you know what, we've never built anything. We've never even built a pocket calculator. How are we going to go build this thing that doesn't even exist? But because we had passion and we had conviction about the quality of the idea, we thought it was worth saying, let's go out there and build all those capabilities. And that was the genesis of our move into manufacturing of hardware devices. And when you go back and talk to Kevin and the team who actually built that, it was pretty inspirational what they did. They weren't worried about the fact we'd never done it before. They just said, there's an unmet customer need, we're going to go figure out how to do it. So that's point one. And I spend a bit of time dwelling on that, but it is probably our single most important operating principle. You pay attention to your competitors, of course, but you obsess about your customers and you try and work backwards. And that drives everything we do. Which takes me on to point two, the passion for invention. And in very simple terms, our teams, our people, get excited when they're doing new stuff, when they're inventing stuff. That's actually what gets people up in the morning and excited. And that happens at two levels. At one level, it's the, hey, wow, let's go and launch, I don't know, the Alexa voice technology. Let's go fly autonomous drones. Let's do something big and wowy like that. And that's important. But actually, it's probably only, I don't know, 15, at most 20% of what we actually do. The vast majority of what we mean when we talk about the passion for invention is, probably hundreds of thousands of small incremental improvements. And when we talk about passion for invention, that's something that we say is the responsibility, almost the obligation of every single person who comes to work for Amazon. You might be a research scientist, you might be a flight test engineer, you might be, I don't know what you are, a commercial leader, you might be a customer service associate, you might be somebody actually picking products in a warehouse. But every single person who works for us, in everything you do, every single day, we believe passionately there are always going to be ways of doing it a little bit more simply, a little bit more quickly, a little bit more better. And it's the accumulation of those hundreds of thousands of generated from each individual who works from us, small incremental improvements that actually add up to the vast majority of the invention. And they matter. Which takes me on to point three. And no apologies for this. It might sound a little dull, commitment to operational excellence. What does that really mean? Actually, for us, this is incredibly important because for us, operational excellence is what earns you customers' trust. And trust, as we always say, is hard-earned and very easily lost. And actually, for most of our customers, and apologies to the customer at the back who's had a terrible experience, I would love to. Now, I'll come back to that. That's important. It's super important because actually, we make a pretty simple promise most of the time. You order something, it turns up. You don't really want a lot of hassle. You just want to know that when you click buy on your phone or your tablet or your whatever, it just turns up. You want to know that when you download a movie over a slightly mediocre broadband connection for various different reasons, it still streams brilliantly without interruption. Each one of those things, day in, day out, getting those small things right, that is operational excellence. And by the way, at this time of the year, when we're about to head into Black Friday and Christmas and all of that, it really matters because this is the time when we have the opportunity to earn or lose your trust. And we're pretty clear which side of the equation we would like to come down on. But we have to earn that trust. Hard-earned, day in, day out. And the reason, by the way, I would love to pick up the anecdote is one of the ways that both that you actually do this is you get really, really worried about what's gone wrong. And not at the generic, look at averages, look at numbers. But we learn an enormous amount from the individual anecdotes that customers are kind enough to give us of when things didn't go right. Because it's actually only by digging into the individual anecdotes that you really have the opportunity to go from, well, what happened? Do we fully understand why did it happen? Can we get right down to the basic level of what really caused that odd thing to happen? If we do that, only then do we have the opportunity to potentially uncover some form of systemic error, make a systemic fix, and genuinely confirm that it won't happen again. And one of the joys, by the way, as François mentioned, I ran our China business for a couple of years before coming back to the UK. One of the pleasant surprises was that it turns out my email address is remarkably discoverable, And I get a lot of customer feedback, which is customer, seller, all sorts of customers, which at one level you think, okay, that's a lot of stuff in your inbox, but actually it's gold dust. Customers who've gone to the trouble of going out there, discovering my email address, writing to me, sometimes at great and very passionate length. There's gold, absolute gold in that. And we have great processes and mechanisms where, of course, we sort out the individual customers. But more importantly, I get to pick a few every week and just ask the teams to just go insanely deep. And, I get assessed, if you like, on how often when I ask to go insanely deep do we actually uncover a systemic defect. Because if we can do that, we fix something, we improve the operational excellence. And then the final one I'll touch on, and those of us, this was the original 1997 shareholder letter when Jeff took the company public. And actually one of the things he said, and I don't know if you guys do this, but by the way, if you ever want to, and again, it's not slightly things, actually go and reading the collected 20-odd years now shareholders' letters is actually a pretty good thing to do. It's something we encourage people to do. You read them from end to end. I think you'll be struck by how consistent the thinking is there in some cases. A lot of what we talk about today was all in there 20 years ago now. But actually one of the things that Jeff was very clear about at the time was that we will take a long-term view. And we're very clear, we're a commercial organisation, we know what our goal is, we're going to optimise free cash flow over the long term, and that's what we do. But we are willing to take a long-term view, which means occasionally we will be willing to take quite deep, quite long-term investments. You know, we don't need an instant payback. We're going to try and do what's right for the customer and ultimately for the business over the long term. Great. So, those are the operating principles. I spend a bit of time on them because they're actually super important to the way we approach the business. And a lot of the rest of it flows from getting these things right. That's what we try and embed in everybody who joins. And I understand some of you are joining us. Yes? One or two. Thank you. Very exciting. That's right. We love LBS. We think you are an impressive school. We're honestly privileged to be here and have the opportunity. Let me talk a bit about what we actually do. And again, because I do get quite a lot of you guys seem to do a lot of stuff, what's all involved, etc. But actually, it's very, very simple. You know, everything we do falls into one of three buckets. And the first one is this one. We are trying to improve the shopping and entertainment experience for an end consumer. That's you, that's me, that's any consumer. Trying to improve the shopping and entertainment experience. So that means it might be physical goods, it might be digital goods. A lot of this gets wrapped up in the Prime experience. Anybody a Prime member? Again, thank you. A lot of you are Prime members, yes. Thank you. That's great. You know, biased sample, by the way. That's not representative of the population at large, just so we're super clear, etc. But thank you. Really appreciate that. But as you know, what we're trying to do is create something that's just great value, that gives you free delivery benefits, same day, next day, always investing in this sort of stuff. We're trying to create great video content, so you'll get here. We're trying to create great music, particularly all that sort of stuff. And it's that combination of trying to improve the shopping and entertainment experience that means we'll always be out there trying to say, can we do what... And again, look, at heart, we started out as a retailer. We are a retailer. It's not very complicated if you're a retailer. Your job is to connect end consumers with the products and services that they would like to buy and consume. That's kind of what we do. And our job is to do that with as little friction as we possibly can. And friction means you want it convenient, you want to have the choice, you want to get there. And you know what? The kind of old retail holy trinity of selection, price, and convenience hasn't really changed, at least for 200 years, arguably maybe 2,000 years. It's kind of all this sort of stuff. And for us, therefore, a lot of improving the shopping experience just starts with the basics of, can you actually get what you want? And interestingly, back in the days when the primary means of getting what you want, and this changes over time, but when the primary means was through physical retail, and lots of us worked in physical retail, you always had this challenge that there was more stuff than there was shelf space. And so you had to edit choice. And we don't think that's a great way to go. We actually think our job is to say, how do we take all of that selection that exists in the world, and how do we connect it with the individual customers who are interested in that across the world? And to give you a feel for this, you know, if you walk into a very large physical outlet, you might find 60, 70,000 individual products. If you went on to one of our larger marketplaces, let's say the UK marketplace this morning, you would find in excess of 250 million unique products. Not 250,000, 250 million unique products, which is a lot. Well, we think it's a lot. Maybe it's not. I don't know. It's not. Which, by the way, introduces another interesting challenge, which, because, you know, what we're trying to do is improve the shopping and discovery experience. And last time I checked, it's quite hard to browse through a list of 250 million things. And typically, quite hard, typically what we'll find is we create a problem that I call the discoverability problem, which is that when you visit our site tonight, you know, or you're browsing or whatever, you know, you'll be on a particular shopping mission or looking for something. You might have time to maybe look at, I don't know, 5, 10 different products. We have to find how do we surface for each individual customer at each individual moment on each individual shopping journey, how from a universe of 250 million do I surface the 5 or 10 that are most relevant to you at this moment in time? It's an interesting challenge. Hint for you, because you're all smart, businessy type people. It's probably not a challenge you can easily solve just using people. Top tip. There you go. That's right. We may touch on some of those other themes. Anyway, that's what we do. And then obviously you'll have seen some of the other stuff we're doing. We will be announcing fairly soon the launch date for Grand Tour 2. Any fans of Grand Tour 2 out there? Yeah, absolutely. We'll be announcing that fairly soon. You've seen lots of other stuff. We've been particularly doubling down in some of our fashion areas. We launched our first private label fashion collection, Fine, sort of a few months ago. We've obviously been putting a lot of energy into the grocery space recently. You may have noticed we bought a grocery store. There you go. Super exciting, but super exciting in terms of our ability to take that product and make it available to any customer of our service. Equally, you've seen, we signed a deal recently with Booths. Anybody from the north? Nobody from the north. One person from the north. Actually, Booths, if you don't know it, fabulous example. And I'll come back to this under my digital empowerment. Great example of a really, really, really great business that's been around mostly in Cumbria or the Lake District, a little bit of Yorkshire, a little bit of Lancashire, for sort of 40-odd years, doing a fantastic job, has never moved outside that geographical area. Suddenly, for the first time, you can actually get access to that fabulous product, even if you live down here. Simply, we come together. And I'll come back to that theme. Anyway, that's shopping and entertainment. Second thing we do is we build, and I talked about the Kindle thing, we build hardware devices. And particularly, as you'll have seen, we're putting a lot of effort into smart, voice-enabled devices. You've seen, we launched a whole bunch of new Echo devices. We've got Fire TV sticks now. We have tablets, all that sort of stuff. And on the whole, though, these devices are designed to improve the access to that shopping and entertainment experience. So again, that's the way in which we actually find how can we know, for example, the voice has turned out to be a fantastically good way of accessing music. Anybody got an Alexa, an Echo device? Yeah, that's right. Do you listen to music? Yeah, it's cool, isn't it? It's great. It's great. It's actually, for a while the old interaction between the human and computer hadn't really moved on for 8-9 years. Actually, we find lots of interesting use cases, and we're still just discovering them. We're actually being able to interact by doing what we're doing, which is just talking. Turns out to be a more convenient experience. Super exciting area. A lot of effort and investment in that area. And then third, and this I think is probably the area that is perhaps least well known. It's probably the area where we've done a less good job in explaining what we do. But actually an enormous part of what we do is not just stuff we do ourselves. It's actually providing tools and services to other businesses to enable them to grow their businesses. And there are sort of three, obvious examples of this. And pretty much everything we do that we use internally, we eventually make available as a service to other people externally. But three examples for that. One is our marketplace. So we started out initially just literally dealing with vendors. We bought stuff, we shipped it, we sold it as a sort of first-party relationship. Then a number of years ago, after a number of very unsuccessful early attempts, because by the way, hand in hand with that point of invention, there's another word, which is failure. And most of the stuff we try doesn't work. And that's fine. Again, go back to Jeff's letter. Jeff wrote a lovely letter a few years ago talking about why you cannot separate invention from failure. Because, if you're never trying stuff, if you know it's going to work, it's not by definition of an experiment, you're not going to try stuff new. And the reason you can do that, and the reason you can be fine to fail, and he uses a sporting analogy. I'll give you a US sporting analogy. Imagine you're playing baseball, and you're the hitter. The ball comes in, and you take a swing, and you hit the single most perfect strike in the entire history of baseball. You just connect. Perfect power, perfect technique, perfect rhythm, and that ball just flies out of the stadium. Amazing. You still only score 4 runs. Okay, game of truncated returns. And Jeff's point is that business is not a game of truncated returns. If you hit the equivalent home run in business, it can give you a return which is so amazing. It pays for an enormous number of failed attempts. So it's worth going. Not the only way of doing it, but that's very much our approach. Anyway, so the marketplace. So the marketplace is our way of actually saying, as well as products that we procure and ship to customers, we also opened up the marketplace to allow many, many other businesses to access those customers. As it stands, 50% of every physical unit we ship globally is not our stuff, it's shipped by us on behalf of our marketplace sellers. Here in the UK, as we approach peak, more than 50% of every single piece of inventory held in our fulfillment centres, again, is held by us on behalf of our marketplace sellers. And the beauty of this is that actually we can go and find many small businesses and enable them to get access to a customer base, a little bit like booths, not just domestically, but actually globally. And I'll come back to that point because the thing I do want to end on is this point about digital empowerment. That's the marketplace. The other big one is obviously web services. Again, how do we actually go and make access to computing services something that's just on demand, pay as you go? So again, you level the playing field. You know, services that once would have been available only to very, very large organizations can now be available to anybody, a startup, a family, a corner shop. So for example, you can go onto web services now, and you've all heard machine learning and that cool sort of stuff. You can go and call down all the algorithms we use as a call-off service in AWS. You can get machine translation, German to Chinese, just as a call-down service, pay as you go. And actually, when I look at what some startup businesses are now doing, without having to take on, I don't have to hire an IT person, I don't have to build my own networks, I don't do this. You know, most organizations can't go and get hold of data scientists. You don't have to. You can actually call it down as a service. And then the third one is our publication services, where we're actually, again, remember we started in books, we're passionate about reading. How do we help authors and potential authors find a readership? So let me just tell you 3 simple stories to illustrate this. There's a fabulous business we know called Synergy, based in Scunthorpe, which is a toy seller. And you know what they have? They have great product. It's a small business, you know. And that's a business with, you know, I think it had only about 10 employees at the time, back end of sort of 2014, who decided, you know what, we're selling businesses in Scunthorpe. Why don't we come on to, in this case, the Amazon Marketplace? There are many, many other marketplaces, but in this case, they came onto the Amazon Marketplace, started to use our fulfillment service, and suddenly found they could start to sell stuff all around the country, which they were pretty excited by, and it all took off and it was going well. And then a year later or so, they said, you know what, why don't we go global? This is a like 10, 15 person business in Scunthorpe. And anybody who's a student, as I'm sure you all are, of retail will know that there is a long and not particularly illustrious history of retailers trying to go global, because it's hard, you know, and many people have tried and not many have really succeeded. But this business, you know, fewer than 20 employees, based in Scunthorpe, in 12 months, opened up the US, Canada, and 23 European countries, just like that. And their sales rocketed. And the reason they could do it is because they brought fabulous product, they concentrated on what they were good at, they really focused on that, they thought hard about it, they thought about their branding, and then they just came to somebody who could help them with how do you physically ship the product, how do you translate it into German, how do you do your tax registration in Italy, all that sort of stuff. So providing those tools and services can level the playing field and actually create a level of digital empowerment, a level at which simply hasn't existed. Let me give you another example. This is a web services example. We've chosen to sponsor the Rural Business Awards this year and various other things because we're pretty passionate about how do you get out there and help those small businesses, particularly in rural communities. And there's some really cool businesses out there these days. I mean, amazingly cool businesses. This particular one I love is called Ice Robotics, which is, my friend Ruben keeps telling me, is basically Fitbit for cows. It's pretty cool. But it's pretty amazing. This is, I'm like, why not? You know, that's right. But actually, if you stop and think for a moment, anybody from a farming background? Yes, there you go. That's right. There you go. That's right. You know, imagine you're out there and you're a farmer and you have a milking herd, etc. And it comes to milking time, you can't find Daisy. You have to run around the fields and get things. Actually, what this company has done is said, look, we'll put GPS trackers on all your cows, and we'll collect all the data, and we'll then run some pretty cool, large, you know, big data analytics and machine learning. And actually, over time, we can help you understand, you know, basic stuff like find my cow when it's gone missing. That's a pretty basic service, but like it's value adding, it saves time. But actually, more importantly, how do you rotate the crop, which fields you use, which ones they're responding to? Actually, you can suddenly make massive interest in the productivity of that particular farm because their yield goes up, they can cross-correlate, they can go back and just say all this sort of stuff. Pretty interesting, eh? And that's just, no, but it's you know, just one example of where if you take that technology, and most farmers are not, last time I checked, experts in big data analytics or data science machine learning. They don't have to be anymore. You can tap into this. Love that business. And then the other one is, again, I was very privileged. We sponsored an event this year, which we called the Kindle Storyteller of the Year Award, which is like it was a book award. But actually, we wanted to lean in and sponsor particularly an award that was for what the industry would describe as self-published authors. And, the books industry historically has, like many industries, there's been bottlenecks on production, on distribution, there have been very high costs. So historically, it's been very hard to get published because you had publishers who had to make decisions because it was so expensive, big bets, who do we back, who do we not back? And that's fine, you can do it. But actually, when we opened up services like Kindle Direct Publishing, Kindle Direct Publishing Print, we can now offer a service where we can go to anybody who thinks they have a book inside them, any prospective author, and says, well, just publish it. And we'll provide all the tools and services. You can do it for free. We can run a sufficiently efficient operation that we can actually allow an author to keep 70% of the cover price and royalties, which is way, way higher than what the industry would typically have done. And then it's up to you to see if you can find a readership. And this was an event where all the finalists were voted for by the readers. It wasn't, a group of the great and the good deciding. And then we did bring together a literary panel to actually read all the books and just say. And we ran this event a couple of months ago, and it was genuinely inspirational. I went there, I met all the authors, and it was amazing because you would meet these people and they would say to you, this has changed my life. All my life, I dreamt of just writing. That's all I wanted to do. I couldn't get published. I couldn't do it. And you've enabled me to stop doing the job I didn't love, to do what I love, which is to write, to make a great living. I mean, it was genuinely inspirational, to see all of the finalists, how well they were succeeding. And for me, that was my fundamental point here. There are so many examples now. I genuinely think there has probably never been a better time to launch a business, to actually take a small business and make it a global business, to launch a startup in a way in which you just could not have done 5 or 10 years ago. I shouldn't say that because none of you will work for us now. You'll all go and do startups. But it is amazing. And I wish when I'd done my startup, this stuff being around, it would have been so much easier. And it's big. If I just give you the UK only numbers, if I add together the UK businesses that are using the marketplace, using web services, using those publication services, UK alone, that is over 373,000 businesses that somehow are doing things that simply would not have been possible before. And it's genuinely inspirational to see what you can do. Let me close, and then we can take questions and things on one final point, which is it would be incredibly remiss of me not to close on the single most important thing, the single most important asset we have, and the single most important asset we're trying to acquire, which of course is our people. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about questions around, what are the role of people, what are the role of machines these days. We love them both. We passionately believe you get the best outcomes when you put these two together and work synergistically. And we do genuinely believe they complement each other. But actually, all of that stuff I've talked about, all of that invention, all of that customer obsession, all of that passion things, that comes down to having great, passionate people who are doing a great job. And it is the single most important thing we look about, the single most important thing we worry about. Probably the single most important constraint on our growth is, can we find enough great, passionate leaders to go and build businesses? That's what we love doing. And, we, again, as I said, we're a values and behavior-led organization. We have these leadership principles. They're public. You can go and read them on our website. That's how we hire. That's how we assess. That's how we try and develop people. But also, I think one of the things we are passionate about doing is trying to say, we want to be a good corporate citizen. That means doing the right things in the communities in which you operate. It means doing stuff which we genuinely believe will benefit the UK or Europe or any other country in which we operate around the world, particularly in terms of encouraging that small entrepreneurial businesses to succeed. It also means doing the right thing for your people. And actually, one thing I did want to say is one of the most important things we are putting energy right now is we absolutely buy into and celebrate the notion of diversity in all its aspects. We genuinely believe, particularly when you're getting to those high judgment decisions that can't be made by machines, that can't be automated, those things that are one of the most important things our people do, we genuinely believe that diversity of views drives better decision making in all its aspects. That's diversity of gender, of ethnicity, of sexuality, of background and thought. It's why we're so, it's why, and I'll just touch on a couple of examples of things we're trying to do here because it's so important to us. We have a bunch of incredibly passionate affinity groups, all of which start up, whether it's black employees at Amazon, whether it's the Women at community. I see we've got a couple of representatives here today, do amazing stuff. We were thrilled that Glamazon, which is our LGBT society, and Amazon Music were able to sponsor Pride in London this summer. Great event. The other bit, and this is probably the one thing, if I worry about, it's the thing I worry about most. I do worry that, and you can take this as a personal view, it's not an official line or anything, but I do worry that the world of work is potentially going through one of those once-in-a-century changes. I suspect when we come back to write the history of the early 21st century, I suspect we'll come back and take a view that the advent of data and informatics and everything that go with that is as transformational a change as electromagnetism was, or even the move from craft to mass manufacture back in the 18th century. And one of the things I worry a little bit about is that history would suggest that every time we've gone through one of those big transformations, in the long run, it's been incredibly good. It's increased global wealth, it's created more and more interesting roles for people to do, but it has involved a period of dislocation. It has involved, in some cases, an entire generation when we hadn't done enough to move ahead of retraining and retooling our workforces. And actually, I think if there's one thing anybody in this room, and I particularly look at LBS, because you guys are out there trying to train and re-educate and so on, actually, I think we all have a huge responsibility to say, how can we help to short-circuit that process? We're doing a few things. We will launch, for example, we have a sort of Amazon Women in Engineering bursary scheme where we actually go and reach out to some individuals who wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity and sponsor them to study here in London, in Edinburgh, and Cambridge around our dev centres. We have AWS Restart where we've committed to finding 1,000 people and retooling them, whether they're kids from underprivileged backgrounds or ex-military people or whatever. But actually, I just think if there's one thing I would ask everyone, because every single one of you will go on, already has or will have incredibly successful careers. I think if there's one thing we all owe to society and the next generation, it's just helping to manage through this transition. Thank you very much.